Okay, we're live now. Carter, thanks for
Hey,
joining me today.
happy to, Eric.
All right, everybody, if you don't know us, I'm Eric Lee. I'm the principal broker for Equity Real Estate and one of the owners and principal broker in Utah. I've got with me Carter Maudsley. Now, Carter is our company attorney. He's also a real estate agent with us here at Equity, so he definitely sees things from this side of it. He isn't distanced from it, but he's also on the forms committee for the UAR, that's the Utah Association of Realtors, who's been integral in putting together all the new forms and changes that we need to make to be in compliance with this. Now, we are not making this training right here for Utah. This is for everybody. So we want to start out talking about this NAR settlement. You're all aware of it. There's no chance that you've missed this in the news or all the chat going around. We do want to talk about how this is going to be implemented, though, because there has been a lot of discussion about what does this really mean for me? Most of you have seen some little videos that maybe your board has put out. Maybe attorneys have mentioned some things. I'm sure you've all seen some cute little things on Instagram or whatever. We want to kind of just deal with the facts here, and I'll jump in and ask some questions about real life applications as we go. But other than that, Carter, when does this start for us?
All right. The terms of the settlement officially start on August 17th. I would advise every agent who is watching this to be familiar with the changes that are going to be in place before then. And then in a little bit, we're going to go over actions that you need to make with existing contractual relationships. And those need to be done by the 17th. So either you'll have something to do by the 17th, and those are typically few and far between. But starting August 17th and thereafter, these will be our practice changes until the foreseeable future.
Okay, so when we say these will be our practice changes, there's a couple things we're going to have to do as realtors, but there's a couple of things that are being done to us, for us. One of those is the MLS. This is the big one. The MLSs can no longer post what we've always thought as a good thing, being transparent with everybody, share right up front how much commission is being offered by the listing brokerage to the buyer brokerage. That's no longer allowable on any MLS system. So let's talk about that a little bit and how that plays out for us.
Yeah, and I think it might help a little bit to go into the background behind that. So the plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit were upset that there was a unilateral offer of compensation that didn't take into consideration that particular buyer, the experience of that buyer's agent, or any other factor. They were just offering this amount of commission. And the plaintiffs really took issue with that. And that, I think, was really at the heart of the lawsuit. One of the changes that the NAR agreed to, and the MLS, the realtor-owned MLSs, one of the changes that they agreed to is probably the most impactful change, which is why we're sitting down and talking about this today, is we no longer broadcast to every other real estate agent how much our commission is. A lot of people think that the sky is falling. I don't see this as a monumental change. This adds one step to what you've previously been doing in marketing a property. You field calls from agents. You are more than welcome to tell them how much commission your buyer is or your seller is willing to offer, up to this amount percent, this dollar amount, whatever it is. It's just going to take a conversation between you as a listing agent and a buyer's agent who's interested in purchasing the property. You can still put it on your website. You can still advertise it on your own social media. And we've been hearing, and I know that Eric has fielded a question like this of people trying to hide a code word in the remarks, making up some cute phrase that would indicate that you are offering 3% or 2.5% buyer agent commission. That's completely unnecessary, and frankly, it shows that you're trying to get around the rules. I think the rule is very, very clear that on the MLS, we cannot offer commission. Don't try to offer it as a concession. Don't try to offer it as a buyer rebate. Have a conversation with the agent. There's nothing in the settlement agreement that prohibits you from actually speaking with the other agent on the other side. And I know in 21st century real estate, that seems like a foreign concept, but it will save you a bunch of time. after that, in having to deal with this. I call up Eric. I say, hey, Eric, I have a buyer that's interested in your listing. Is your seller offering a buyer agent commission? And Eric has a couple of different answers. He can say, absolutely, we're offering up to 3%, up to 2%, up to 1%. We're offering $1,500, whatever. So you know that they're willing to cooperate. At that point, frankly, I believe that's all you need to know, because then you can negotiate your rate with the seller or the seller's agent. I think just knowing that they are willing to offer some type of commission is sufficient. And that takes a phone call. That takes going to that agent's website and seeing if they are offering it. They think that the settlement plaintiffs think that this is a monumental change. To me, it just adds only one step to the existing buyer agent, seller agent relationship.
Thank you. We do have the tools to address these things as well. We have forms that we're equipped with, and we'll get into those in a little bit. So that's one of the big changes from this NAR settlement, is no longer do we see the buyer agent commission offered through the MLS. But again, I have to second what Carter said. This isn't going to end our business. It isn't going to end our industry. There have been changes like this. There have been legal changes. The lending industry went through a bunch of changes over the last few years, and everybody said the sky is falling, and yet here we are still doing business. So that's the big message that we want to convey to you guys, is that good agents don't find ways around the law. They don't find ways to creatively break the law. Good agents say, okay, what is the law? And how do I get in compliance so that I can protect myself, protect my clients, and protect my brokerage? And that's what we're here to talk about. So in that vein, there is something that comes about with this NAR settlement that we need to do. So the MLSs are doing their thing. One of the big things that we need to do now is get a buyer agency agreement up front. Now, here in Utah, we're used to this. We've had this practice forever, but I was surprised to learn that, 39 out of the 50 states didn't have required buyer agency agreements. So Carter, talk about this change and what exactly is required by the agreement.
Yeah, and in talking to all the state brokers for equity, there's only 2 or 3 states that I know of that don't already practice this. So this just might seem a little redundant to those states, Utah, Colorado, that do require buyer agency before writing a contract. What the change from the settlement agreement is that the plaintiff's counsel or the plaintiffs were focused on the buyers being aware of what they were getting themselves into prior to even viewing a house. And so what's required under the settlement agreement is that we have a written agreement with any potential purchaser of a property in place before we show a house. That includes both in-person showings and virtual showings. And there's a couple different ways that we can accomplish this. The method that equity teaches and that equity prefers is that you form an agency relationship with that buyer at first contact, or at the very least before going to see that first home. The key to being in compliance with the settlement agreement is that you must have a written agreement with your buyer prior to viewing a house. I mentioned both virtual and in person. Yeah, if you FaceTime a buyer, you're going to need a buyer agency agreement or a showing agreement. And those are the 2 ways that we can establish that written agreement threshold that the settlement terms. No, go ahead.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
I don't know how to tag myself in otherwise.
Right.
So in practical matters, I just want to jump in here really quickly. I'm not disagreeing with anything Carter says when I jump in. Usually I'm jumping in from the practical matter side of things. I've been doing trainings for years, teaching agents how to communicate their value as a buyer's agent. And it is not that hard. Don't be scared of this. Okay. The minute you hear somebody talking about wanting to buy a home, instead of getting their list so that you can run home and set up hot sheets and stuff, you want to say, hey, you know what? I specialize in working with buyers. Let me sit down with you for 15, 20 minutes and we can go through the whole process, start to finish. It'll answer a lot of important questions that you have, maybe in some you didn't think to ask. And not knowing the answer to some of these questions in this business of hundreds of thousands of dollars buying a home, when you don't know the answers, you could easily lose a couple $1,000s. And so this is one of the services I provide. Let's sit down and chat. And really in 15, 20 minutes, you can do a buyer presentation that communicates so much more value than I can drive around and get you into houses with my magic key. There isn't a lot of value associated with that. But when they understand everything that you are doing for them, in my experience, it's 99% of the time, they'll sign an exclusive buyer agency agreement with me. But not always will that happen. You know, maybe somebody that I don't know, they call off of my sign. They want to go and they want to see my listing and maybe 2 or 3 other listings around my listing. Do I need an agency agreement for those?
No, and that's, we've kind of, not kind of, we have come up with two solutions. The first, as you spoke about, is the agency agreement. And like the offer of compensation being removed from the MLS, all this requires is a little bit more communication with that prospective buyer, explaining your value, explaining why that is a good thing for them to enter into. But you're right, Eric, there's going to be those buyers out there that either you don't know from Adam, and maybe you don't want them as a buyer, or more commonly, I think that we're going to run into consumers who are very adamant that they will not sign an agency agreement. To help that, we have are in the process of creating a showing agreement, a limited services agreement, if you will, where the terms of which will comply with the settlement. It will be a written agreement. It will discuss your compensation that you're receiving for that service. And that limited agreement will be limited to showing that particular property or properties for a limited amount of time. It doesn't create agency between you and the buyer. All this is to comply with the settlement terms that we must have a written agreement before touring a house.
So in practical matters, again, the way this would play out, I'm getting paid. If I'm the agent, Carter's my buyer client who refuses to sign an agency agreement with me for whatever reason. And I say, Carter, I'm happy to show you some homes today. We are required to have an agreement in place before I show you anything. We can use this agreement just for showing homes, and you compensate me $50 for my time for showing these homes to you. This doesn't create agency of any kind. I can't write an offer with this agreement. If you do love one of the homes and want me to write an offer, we would have to use a separate agency agreement. But for today, you give me $50. Now that $50, again, just to be clear, that money has to come through the brokerage. It would have to be paid to Equity Real Estate. And our file would be very simple. We would put it, in Utah, we use .loop. We would have that 1-page form, which is our showing agreement. And we could get a check made out to Equity Real Estate for $50. So yeah, it seems maybe a little bit silly to you, maybe trivial to you, but if that's the route that you go, that's how it would work.
Yeah, and you also have the option to charge nothing, or to charge $1,000, or to charge $10,000. I mean, it's up to you what you are willing to charge under that showing agreement. But Eric, you're absolutely right. If you do end up charging any, even if it's zero, Equity still will need a copy of that showing agreement in place.
So another real world thing about this that maybe a lot of people haven't talked about, but I've heard it brought up a couple of times, is since I'm now negotiating my commission with everybody that I meet with, again, my best practice is to sit down, do a buyer presentation to truly communicate my value. We go through the whole process. They understand that I'm not just the magic Uber driver, that I'm helping out in lots of different ways, babysitting that from start to finish, interacting with all the different people, making sure the deadlines, the contracts, all that stuff. Okay. I communicate my value and they sign with me. One of the dangers that I've heard is, what if I negotiate a different value with every single person? Could that potentially open me up to a claim of discrimination because I'm offering one thing to, and I've heard different opinions on this, but I think just from my point of view and what I want to convey, because this is a recorded training and those go down in history, what I would convey to you guys is establish your own business practice, whatever that is. Okay. If you're going to charge your buyers 3%, charge them all 3%. If you're going to charge your buyers 2%, charge them all 2%. If you're going to have a menu of services, I will do showings for $1,000. I will do a full representation for this much. I will, you know, if you found the home yourself and I'm just doing the paperwork, I'll do that for 1%. Whatever. If you have a menu of services, apply that menu to everybody across the board. What we don't want to get caught up in is where inadvertently, without any intention, I would hope there would be no intention for discrimination against a protected category or class of people. But we don't even want to have somebody that could take our story and twist it to make it look that way. So as you're out there now negotiating on every one of your deals, I would encourage you to think a little bit beforehand, have your plan ready to go, and then implement that plan uniformly across the board with everybody that you work with.
And I think it's important that just because you have a policy does not mean that it is not negotiable. So a lot of the reason why this lawsuit came about is because the plaintiff's class felt like buyers could not negotiate properly with their buyer agent to negotiate that commission rate, that they were just accepting whatever the seller was offering. And yes, it is a good policy to have something in place so we can say, no, this is what I work for. But if you are negotiating because you have that buyer who won't sign a buyer agency agreement for more than 1%, just have some type of notation or history that you did engage in negotiations with that particular buyer personally. That in case we do get accused of having any discriminatory practices, we can go back to that email or the text message that you had with that particular buyer to say, no, look, they negotiated with me. This was not me setting a different price for different clients.
Thanks, Carter.
Yeah.
Along that line of what I'm negotiating, can I just put 1 to 3%?
No, and that's so. I think we shifted gears a little bit, Eric. We're kind of back into the buyer agency agreements that we prefer be in place and need to be in place if you're going to be negotiating on a property. The commission rate has to be readily ascertainable and it cannot be variable. So you need to have a number in there that can be easily calculated. Percentages, of course, based on sales price of house, as we have been doing in the past. Having a 1 to 3% won't work for the terms of the settlement. I had an agent ask me the other day, well, why don't I just put 2 to 10%? And then that should cover every offer of compensation that's coming in from a seller. And frankly, it just doesn't comply with the settlement agreement. The NAR has come out and said that any variable rate, not based on a change in services, is patently in violation of the settlement agreement. So for a rule of practice, put in a percent or a fixed dollar amount, and that way you are protected as far as it pertains to the settlement agreement.
Now, there is some dispute out there, and we may see this fall out, but we are taking the stance that if I put 2% in my buyer agent commission agreement and I show a listing that's offering me 3%, I cannot accept 3%. Now, this is specific language in the settlement that says that I cannot accept more than what we've agreed to with my buyer. And so if I put in 2%, can I later negotiate it up? Now, Carter and I have talked about this at length. And Carter, why don't you address that one?
I mean, there's a really complex answer that leads me to believe that you can't, and I don't know if this is the appropriate forum to go into that length of conversation. But it's my opinion, and I think the opinion of Equity Real Estate is that we are limited to receiving what is in your buyer agency agreement. There's a couple of ways to comply with the settlement agreement properly and still receive whatever the seller is offering type of situation. It takes a little bit of work on your end, and I'm not sure if it's going to be fruitful, but if you are concerned about that, if you are concerned about having a buyer agency commission be 2.5% in your buyer broker agreement and want to take advantage of that extra 0.5% or 2% or whatever the seller is offering, I would recommend that you have buyer agency agreements that are entered into the time that you know what the commission being offered is. This is going to be a different buyer agency agreement for that buyer for that specific property. And if you show a buyer 12 properties and you're concerned about getting that extra 0.5%, then the reality is you're going to have 12 different buyer agency agreements that are specific to each of those properties in order to comply with the terms of the settlement.
What's the other option? Because to me, that sounds really cumbersome.
Right.
I would rather just go sit down, communicate my value and say I work for 3% or 2.5% or whatever. It's all negotiable, folks. That's the key word. I could sit down and say, hey, this is what I charge right here. And then if they're offering less than that, can I choose to accept less? If they're offering 2.5%, and I'm like, I'm not going to sweat 0.5%.
Right. And so let's start with the first part of that. And it kind of comes down to the theme that we've been going along. This is all about what some people are going to see as difficult conversations with your client. If you are not confident that you can adequately convey your value as a real estate agent, as a buyer's agent to your client, this is going to sound very uncomfortable. But if you learn and are able to convey to your buyers what your value is and be confident in setting that commission that you're willing to work for, then this is just another conversation that you're having with a potential client, albeit a tough one. But it's just another communication where you get to say, here's what I'm worth, here's why I charge what I do, and here's what I charge. Now, there are going to be times when, let's say Eric has a buyer agency agreement with a client for 3.5%, and his client falls in love with a house that is only offering 2.5%. Under the terms of that buyer agency agreement, Eric gets to decide if he's going to require his buyer to pay that extra percent, or if he's going to let the buyer or say to the buyer, you know what, the 2.5% that the seller's offering, that's enough for me. In that case, I would definitely amend your buyer broker agreement. Amend it down. So the client is aware that their agreement with you is being satisfied with that reduced commission included in your BBA or EBA, whichever one you want to call it. And that way payroll also knows that you should be receiving this percent.
And a quick tip that I got from another real estate agent this past week is amend it down just for that property. Because if that, you go under contract on this property and later on it falls through due to inspections, you don't have a buyer agency agreement that has been amended down across the board, because now you're going to go back out showing new homes. So if you do amend it down with an addendum, make it particular to that property that you're negotiating for. And then if that falls apart, then your original terms still apply. So you got a couple of ways to do it. You can do a different agreement for every property that you show, or you could have a set term up front and you can negotiate down, but you cannot negotiate up and you cannot have a variable rate that's in there.
Yeah, and I think that's the two most important things of this section that the agent should take away is that you cannot negotiate up. I mean, flat out, I don't see a way to do that. You can't have a variable rate commission. So those are the two highlights, if you will. Some will see them as lowlights, but the highlights of the new world of buyer agency that we're in.
Okay, so to do a quick summary on this, we have to have a written agreement. It does not have to be buyer agency, but we do have to have a written agreement before we show any homes, virtual or live. That written agreement can come in one of two forms. We can have just an agreement for showing homes, and we are working on preparing that. Some boards have already created it. In fact, I was talking to Carter yesterday. They've offered to license their form to us, which we'll make a couple slight adaptations to. But we will have a form that allows you to simply show homes if that's the course you want to go. And then, of course, you've got your exclusive buyer agency agreement that you can sign. And the key term with that is that you need to have a fixed amount in there, not a variable amount. And if you decide later to negotiate down, you can, but you cannot negotiate up. Have I
That's a
Is that
great,
good enough?
great summation. We just took 15 minutes too long trying to explain a relatively simple concept.
It's good for people to understand the background,
Oh,
though.
no, of course it is.
Really quickly, I do want to make sure that we're clear on that showing agreement. That does
Yeah.
not constitute agency. We cannot use that to then represent a buyer. In fact, I could hypothetically, if I were using that with you, I could take you out, I could show you homes. You pay me my $50 for the day or $0 or whatever. And that afternoon, sign a buyer agency agreement with a different agent to write an offer on that home that I showed you. So
Correct.
that doesn't provide me a lot of protection. It allows me legally to be in compliance with the terms of the settlement by allowing me to go out and show homes, but it provides me almost zero protection as far as getting paid.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's easy to get in place, but it doesn't protect you and it doesn't protect them. But it complies with the settlement, which is what I think people are most concerned about right now.
Okay, so moving on. How does this affect sellers?
All right. So sellers, there's been a lot of discussion on what the seller's role in this transaction is. Is this allowing their agent to share commission that they're paying? Is it the authorization for a seller to be paying commission? And I don't know the answer of it, or the answer to it. I don't know which way over the next 6 months, a year, 2 years. I don't know how the industry is going to respond. I have a prediction that the commissions are going to be negotiated directly with the seller in each purchase contract. That's just my gut feeling. I have nothing that's saying that is the rule, but what has changed as a result of the settlement is that now our listing agreements now are bifurcated, if you will. And I'm going to speak of what's contained in the Utah one, just because I think it applies to just about every state we operate in, and it's easier for me because I'm pretty familiar with that one. So there's now 2 sections of compensation in the listing agreement. There is a listing agent compensation, which is what you will be paid to market the house and negotiate a successful sale. That goes in one section. That section does not include the commission that you are going to be sharing if your seller authorizes you to offer compensation. That's contemplated in a completely different section. So you'll have your listing agent commission in the first section. There will be a second section that says, okay, seller, we know that you're going to get the highest value, and we know that your offer is going to be higher the more people we get into your house, and therefore we recommend that you offer a cooperating agent commission through me as the listing broker. And so here's the amount of money that you are willing to offer a buyer agent, And it says up to that amount because the listing agreements all contemplate that now buyer agency agreements are going to be everywhere from $1 to 7%. And so that section allows you to contemplate paying up to an amount for a buyer agent commission. You have a buyer that comes in who has a buyer agency agreement for 2%. Your seller is only obligated to pay 2%. If not obligated, but can only pay 2% to that buyer's agent. If they authorize you up to 3%, they just netted an additional 1% of the purchase price. So it's dictating how much they are willing to pay a cooperating buyer's agent up to whatever amount they put in there.
Okay. Sounds good. Now, of course, remember that the first thing that we talked about is whatever that we negotiate in that listing agreement. If we do negotiate to the seller is willing to offer some form of compensation to a buyer's agent, that we can't post that on the MLS. So
Correct.
How do we share that information? And I want to jump really quickly because you told me this yesterday. So I looked it up. I used it in my training this morning. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. But is it true that I can post it on my personal website, even if it's fed by an IDX feed? I can go in there and post it on my personal website.
Absolutely. The terms of the settlement are such that agents can communicate that offer of compensation pretty much any way they want to, except for on the MLS. And that's the very, very important thing. MLSs aren't even going to ask for a buyer agent commission anymore. There's going to be no place for you to input it. Like I said before, please don't try and be sneaky and put it in seller concessions or hide it in the remarks or anything like that, because you have the ability as an agent to publish that however you want. If you want to hire a skywriter to write 3% buyer agent commission in the sky above your listing, you can do that. If you want to send postcards to the neighborhood that say 2% buyer agent commission offered on this house, absolutely. If you want to put it on your flyers at your open house, you are totally able to do that. It does not, the terms of the settlement do not restrict who you can say that to. They only restricts it to every way but the MLS. I guess that's a really awkward way of saying it.
Let me show you how easy this is too. So you guys know that we provide you with the ProAgent website. So if you've never been to Elevate before, go to Elevate, and on the main page there, there's websites. So I clicked on that. I've got my ProAgent website's admin. I click on admin page. That brings this up, and I click on site editor. Okay, so again, I'm going to go through this again. If nobody's been here before, go back to our home page, just show you how easy this is to find. As long as I hate clicking things when I'm live because it always takes forever to load. But I'll go to my home page. I'll click the website right here, your website. I click that, pulls this up. I click go to admin page. That brings this up, and I hit site editor. You'll notice as you go down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, I've got buyer agent commissions. I can add a BAC by clicking this, put in my MLS number, put in the percent, and I can put in how much we're offering. You know, anywhere from $1, click dollar amount there, or 1%, 3%, whatever, and boom, it's done. So that part by technology has been made super simple for us to share. And then, like he said, you can share it on your social media. You can do all these things. So please quit trying to find creative ways to break the rules.
Right.
All right. And it's funny. We see the memes online. We're aware of all of that stuff, but we're not trying to find ways to hide it in the MLS, because quite frankly, doing it the right way is very simple.
And arguably the correct way. Being transparent in our marketing, I think is always a good standard to adhere to.
Okay. Let's see. We can't mention it in the comments on the MLS. We've covered that. We can't hide it in seller concessions field. And then so you've got, I'm looking at some of my notes that we had.
Yeah, no. And I had mentioned open houses before. So let's talk about open houses.
Let's talk about that.
As a seller's agent holding a house open, you are working for the seller. You are actively marketing that house for that seller. Yes, we all know that we have the potential to pick up buyers during that transaction and during that open house. However, the terms of the settlement do not require that you have a written agreement with anyone who walks in that door. So as long as you are holding an open house for your seller or an equity seller, you don't need written agreements or written authorizations with any of those buyers as they cross the threshold. I think that's a big concern of a lot of agents, and I think that is pretty easily put to rest in that if you are working for the seller, you don't need a written agreement with the buyer.
To show the seller's home.
Now, to show the seller's home, yeah.
Yeah, we mentioned this a little bit earlier. If somebody calls off of one of my listings and says, hey, I'd like to see your listing, I saw it online. One of the great things to do is say, hey, I'm happy to show you this. And in fact, there's 3 or 4 listings around mine that you may be interested in seeing as well. I could do that, and that's a great way to pick them up as a buyer, right? I can show them my own listing without having an agreement signed, either an agency agreement or a showing agreement. But if I'm going to show them those other 3 or 4, I'm going to have a written agreement in place. So you don't have to have it when you're representing the seller on their home, but if the minute you step out the door and show them the neighbor's home, you're going to need it. So it might be a good idea to carry a couple of these forms around in your car with you. Yeah,
and they're simple 1-page forms. Put one on your iPad, email it to the prospect when you sign it. You could even do it in DocuSign. You know, it's they're always a good idea to have these forms with you.
Let's talk really quick about how to get paid as a buyer's agent. Okay,
Yeah.
I think we've jumped around this. We've talked about how sellers can offer this form of payment. As a buyer's agent, how do I get paid? I don't have any guaranteed compensation now from the MLS, and this is very important for us agents to understand. I really hope some agent doesn't neglect to see this training, doesn't neglect to get the training, go through the entire process of representing a buyer from start to finish, and realize at the finish line, I didn't get paid a commission.
Correct.
And nor will I ever get paid a commission because there was no commission agreement in writing. So let's talk about how do we make sure as a buyer's agent we get paid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to bring up how we used to get paid. As members of our MLS, we had an agreement with every listing agent out there that we would accept the cooperative commission that they were offering on the MLS. That was the agreement that we relied on, even though probably 99% of you have never read the terms and conditions of being a member of that MLS. You've always operated as if you will get paid based on what was published in the MLS. When that goes away, and in some states they're doing it as early as next week, that they're going to be removing that. This is just one more conversation that you're going to have with the seller's agent. Find out what's being offered. And there's one of two ways after that. You can, after that, to ensure that you get paid. You can come to a broker-to-broker commission agreement saying that for this property, I am showing you this house. If I bring you an offer, here is what you are going to be compensating me with. This is what you agreed to. This is what your seller has authorized. You can have that separate from your purchase contract, but how I see this going in the majority of deals is that commissions will be discussed within the purchase contract. And I know some of you right now are saying, well, wait, I thought we were never supposed to put commissions in the REPC. We can, and this is how, because it's the seller who is paying an expense of the buyers on the buyer's behalf. The seller is saying, hey, I'm going to sell you my house. I'm going to satisfy the terms of your buyer agency contract for you in order for you to buy the house. And the buyer says, absolutely, let's do that. So the second way is to just include it in your purchase contract. Some states already have it in there that this is how much the buyer's agent is going to be receiving. Utah, for example, has a brokerage to brokerage commission instruction addendum that you can add as part of your offer. And the worst case scenario is, excuse me, not the worst case scenario, but the other method is to, Utah's attempting to amend their REPC right now. It's a state approved form, so we're seeing a little bit of a delay on that, but there will be a space in there to talk about any additional commission that the seller is going to be paying as a result of the real estate purchase contract. And we also have an addendum that says as much as a stopgap that says, okay, seller, you are paying me directly. I'm not being paid through the listing agent. You will be paying me directly. Or it can be a combination of all three. I mean, or both of those methods. It can be part compensation through the cooperative broker share and some additional money from the seller, or it could be one or the other.
So to summarize that, I have two ways to get paid as a buyer's agent. I can get compensated by the listing brokerage, and I have to have that in writing. By the way, none of these ways are just guaranteed payment. You have to get it in writing. You have to call, you have to talk to the other person. So the first one is a contract between listing brokerage, buyer's brokerage, right? That's the real estate brokerage commission agreement or compensation agreement. We're agreeing to pay each other, or the listing brokerage is agreeing to pay the buyer's brokerage. The other way to do it is, and this may play out, like Carter said, in most instances where we're negotiating it into the contract. In a perfect world, I call the listing agent. I say, I'd like to make an offer on your place. How much are you offering as a buyer compensation? He tells me, I write up my contract accordingly, right? And we get that agreement signed before I send over my offer. Because that broker to broker compensation agreement is not a part of your offer, it is feasible that I could send them that compensation agreement. They fail to sign it, refuse to sign it, but then I send separately my purchase contract, which they do sign, that doesn't have any mention of compensation. And now I'm out in the cold, and they refuse to sign some form of compensation agreement, and yet we're under contract to buy the home, which of course leaves my buyer holding the bag with that full responsibility. So like Carter said, I think a lot of cases we're going to just see those negotiations played out, because even if I did call that listing agent, what are the chances they call me back? You know, I'm writing up the offer right now. Are they going to call me back in the next hour while I'm writing this up? Or is it going to be a day or two later? And
Yeah.
if I don't know what I'm being offered, then I want to play the safe game, and I want to put it into the purchase contract so that it is part of all the same agreement. Here's our offer, and it includes satisfying this compensation amount that covers my buyer's agent's fees. And again, that offer is not coming from you, the agent. It's coming from the buyer to the seller saying, I want you to satisfy my obligation to my agent. And that's why it's legal to put it in there.
And I mean, rest assured that it affects the seller's bottom line, which is really what this all does, right? Any commission that they pay either through a broker or directly to the buyer's broker affects their bottom line, and the seller has control over what that offer looks like. And so that's the justification in being able to do it through the purchase contract.
Okay, let's talk really quick about how not to get paid as a buyer's agent.
Yeah,
This
unfortunately.
this is the bloopers reel, okay, that you'll be playing afterwards, the things that you're going to be crying to your broker about, and he's going to have very little to zero compassion on you. But when you call him up and you say, hey, I forgot to get this signed, right?
Yeah, and that's number one on the top four ways. The easiest way not to get paid is to not have a written agreement with your buyer. The timing is very important on this as well, because you will want to have a buyer agency agreement before you write that offer. Ideally, the first time you meet that buyer, but absolutely the very latest in conjunction with writing that offer. If you don't have a written agreement, the language of the settlement agreement is very, very clear that you have no claim to a commission. So that's the easiest way to not be paid anything.
Top two on our hit list is, and I've actually heard people train this way. I had it reported to me by brand new agents, is fill out the buyer agency agreement, but put 0 in the field, because you're going to get compensated by the seller. That, by the way, is not advice to do. That is the blooper reel. Do not put 0 in the field of compensation there.
And a lot of agents were in the habit of that because of the MLS contract that all of us agents had with each other. We knew that we could show any house and we would be paid what that compensation being offered was. And so a lot of agents said, hey, I work for free, therefore I'm putting 0% of my buyer agency commission in the buyer agency agreement, which made it a lot easier of a conversation with that buyer. It's a no risk to them agreement, which may have entice some buyers to work with an agent. However, doing that now will ensure that you don't make a dime, because you are limited to making the amount of money that you disclose to the buyer that you will be making. And if you tell them 0%, the most under the terms of the settlement that you can receive is 0%. So yes, absolutely. I think it's a pretty close tie with the number one way to not get paid. I think it's just a little bit number two, because it does require that you did half of the work, you just didn't fill it out correctly.
And I'm just going to state this because we are recording this for posterity's reasons and for lawsuit reasons. If you close a deal and don't get paid, you still have to pay equity or minimum fees. We still have full liability, full responsibility to manage that file. You didn't get paid, you have to pay those fees yourself now. So not only did you do it for 0, you did it, and it's going to be dipping into your account to satisfy that obligation, because you do have that obligation to the brokerage. So want to get that in writing, so to speak, have it out there. And then really quickly, so that this doesn't stretch on too long, I think we've covered all of these concepts really well. The one thing that we haven't talked about, Carter, is what happens to my existing agreements. I currently have buyers that I'm working with. I currently have listings that are up for sale. What needs to happen as of August 17th with my current ones? Does this change? Is it retroactive? If I'm under contract with a buyer right now, do all of a sudden I not get paid? What happens with the existing contracts?
The best practices in this is to make them aware of the changes that have occurred. A big point of the settlement agreement is that they want every buyer and every seller to know that commissions are not set by law, not set by state, not set by association. Commissions are set between the agent and the client, and that disclosure needs to be made. And so Utah, I know has, and I'm doing a survey of all the other states, but I'm pretty certain that every state has a mechanism or has created an addendum to your existing listing form and an addendum to your existing buyer agency form, which says commissions are not set by anyone but you and me, no, not set by law, not set by association, not set by licensing boards, anything. Commissions are strictly between you and me. The other thing that it does disclose on the buyer agency commission is that amount that you are working for, or reiterates that. Those, I would recommend you start getting those addendums signed if they are actually published by your local association. I know that Utah's will be online by the beginning of next week. Start now, just get it done before the 17th. I know of a seller of mine that I'm going to have to get one done. We've already had this conversation because we were listing in this time where we knew the change was going to happen, but the new form wasn't available for me to use. So I will be amending that listing agreement. Any prospective buyers, please do that as well, because I think more scrutiny is going to be with those buyers than with the sellers. But just make sure that you get the disclosure to your current clients that these changes have taken place.
Thanks. And if I have a buyer right now that's under contract, and I've got an offer of compensation through the MLS, I have that MLS printout available, but it's not going to close until after August 17th. Do I need to be concerned? Do I need to get a separate agreement in writing by that broker, by that seller? Is this
really
retroactive?
Eric? I mean, the attorney, the real estate agent in me says, no, I don't want to have to go and get that from the other side. The attorneys in me, I get paid to wear belts and suspenders. And so the suspenders to the belt in this is to get that addendum to the listing agreement signed. Very rarely does full transparency ever, is that ever a bad thing? If you talk to the listing agent and say, hey, our deal's not supposed to close till the 22nd of August. I know that we're only 5 days into the settlement world, but I would feel more comfortable if we had all of our cards out on the table. Here's what I'm getting paid. Here's how I'm getting paid. And I also want to reiterate to my buyer and to your seller that commissions aren't set by anyone other than us. I think it's a best practices if you have a transaction under contract to get those same disclosures in writing.
All right. Is there anything else we've left off?
Yeah, two quick things. These settlement rules are limited to residential transactions 1 to 4 units. So if you are showing apartment buildings, or you're showing strip mall leases, or you're doing land sales that aren't for residential purposes, none of this applies. And so I know that we have a few agents who do a lot of commercial work. Good news, those agents don't worry about this when it comes to warehouses or commercial leases, office space, so on and so forth. The other quick thought,
I would add still, even when you're representing commercial, get an agency agreement in place up front. It's just best practice across the board. Yeah.
Doesn't change the need for an agency agreement, and you will practically be using the same agency agreement when working with those commercial buyers. Doesn't change the fact that it's not required. And but best practices, the suspenders, get everything in writing with everybody according to the terms of the new settlement. And then the one last thing that I have on our list, Eric, is let's talk about the brokerage administration fee that equity charges. We have a separate form informing the buyer that it used to be the document storage access fee. What is it called now, Eric?
Brokerage administrative fee.
Brokerage administrative fee. That is in writing. They know how much that is. They are agreeing to pay for it. I think that complies with the terms of the settlement. So there's no need to include that in your buyer agency commission or buyer agency agreement.
So no changes to that at all.
Correct.
Okay. Sounds good. Y'all, if you have questions after this, feel free to reach out to your broker, your managing broker, And if they have questions, they're free to reach out to us, and we'll probably all be running into some fun scenarios where we see this applied in a million different ways. But for now, just realize it isn't going to be super complicated, and it isn't a reason to go and inactivate your license. Just put your shoulder to the wheel and push along.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.